You are listening to 600 Second Saga. Today's feature is Like Bad Spray Paint by J.W. Troemner. Rosario looked around, trying to see if anybody was looking this way, to see if anybody could see this at all. But no, most rational people went over bridges. They didn't wade around underneath them. This particular spot was completely invisible from anywhere but right down here. Which meant she couldn't just ask if anybody else could see the giant snake lizard thing wrapped around the bridge's support beam. She tried to think back. She'd actually scraped together enough donations that she didn't have to go dumpster diving, so it wasn't like she'd eaten something tainted. She hadn't dosed on anything in the past week, so she wasn't tripping. A back trip, maybe? Or maybe she was sick. Maybe something in her brain just snapped and decided that from now on she'd see things that weren't there. That thought scared the hell out of her. Maybe it was something else. An art installation from the university, or a viral marketing campaign for the zoo. Wasn't the Chinese Culture Fair coming up? It had been a while since she'd been to this side of town, after all. So Rosario stumbled down the weedy riverbank, closer to the foul-smelling water. It was still right there. A dragon, as big around as her waist, with antlers like a deer and whiskers like a catfish, and blue scales that looked more like bad spray paint than the shiny snake scales you saw in pictures. Yeah, probably an art project. She reached out, just to prove it to herself. It was just papier-mâché and plastic, just fiberglass and aluminum, It moved. Holy shit! She yelped, falling back on her ass. She would have crab-walked away, but her hands sank into the mud and left her trapped. The dragon opened one eye, the size of her closed fist, as brown as her own eyes, but slitted like a cat's. Its nostrils flared as it took a deep, wheezing breath that smelled of rotten fish and ozone. She held her breath and tried to calculate how many Hail Marys she needed to say to make up for 3 years without going to confession. Running away didn't even cross her mind. She was out of shape and up to her knees in mud. And besides, she'd met enough angry junkyard dogs to know better. Running would only make it chase her. She must have made the right call, because the dragon flared its nostrils again in an indignant huff and shut its eyes. This was her chance. She could sneak away and then grab the first bus out of town and never look back. That's what any sane, rational person would have done. A sane, rational person would have decided that almost pissing themselves once was enough for one day. A sane, rational person wouldn't have reached out again to touch the dragon. Each one of its scales was as big as her hand, ridged down the middle and cool to the touch. It opened its eyes again and regarded her, looking half bored, half tired. A long, forked tongue slid from its mouth and wrapped around her wrist. Rosario yanked her hand back with a yell. The desperate need to get away outweighed her better sense. She fled, only to fall on her ass again halfway up the riverbank. As she righted herself, she glanced back at the dragon. It had lifted its head, one enormous claw forward, like it meant to climb to its feet. But as she watched, it swayed and sank slowly back into the muck, like it couldn't stay up under its own weight. Its ears flicked in her direction. Its brown eyes followed her up the slope, looking forlorn, but it made no other attempt to get up. Maybe it couldn't. The thought bothered her, and it kept bothering her while she ducked into the bathroom of some small chain chicken shack and changed into her drier clothes. The feeling didn't go away when she scrubbed her muddy shirt in the sink. She'd just seen a dragon. A real, live, honest-to-God dragon. The kind of thing you only see in movies and on the menus of Chinese restaurants. The discovery should have filled her with shock or awe or excitement or the urge to call the nearest news channel and tell the world. Those were all sane, rational reactions. Instead, she dug through her backpack for loose change. $19.23. If she spent another day panhandling, she'd have enough for a motel room. That might save her life once the weather turned cold. The sane, rational thing to do was save it for an emergency. Instead, Rosario walked down to the riverbank, a sack of fried chicken in her arms and 48 cents to her name. The dragon's ears perked up and its eyes opened, but it didn't lift its head again, not even when she set the first drumstick on the mud between them. She picked up the chicken and set it a little closer. Still nothing. Maybe dragons didn't eat chicken. The thought annoyed her. She'd just spent almost every dime she had on this meal. Like hell she was going to be snubbed by some fairy tale. She picked up the drumstick and held it right to the dragon's maw. Eat it. Huge nostrils flared. The tongue slid out once again and caught the chicken, tugging it between teeth as long as kitchen knives. The dragon chewed once, then swallowed with a dainty gulp. A crispy thigh followed the drumstick into its mouth, then another. The dragon was eating faster, like it only just realized its own hunger. Rosario reached into her paper bag for another, but when she looked up again, the dragon was gone. In its place was a girl, blue scales still fading into goose-pimpled skin. She was short and thin, and her clothes were almost completely lost under the thick layers of mud and... was that blood? But if the grime bothered her, it didn't keep her from grabbing the next drumstick and shoving it into her mouth. There was a sudden snap and Rosario stumbled backward. The dragon girl was eating the chicken whole, bones and all. She didn't have a chance to get properly queasy before the girl moved toward her. Then her knees buckled. The girl collapsed into the mud, blinking in dizzy confusion, like she couldn't understand what had just happened. She turned her big brown eyes up to Rosario, expectant and questioning and utterly helpless. Rosario didn't even know what a sane, rational person would do anymore. She certainly wasn't one. "Come here," she said, kneeling. "Let's get you someplace warm." This was Like Bad Spray Paint by J.W. Troemner. J.W. Troemner was born in Germany and immigrated to the United States, where she lives with her partner in a house full of pets. Most days she can be found gazing longingly at sinkholes and abandoned buildings. You can find out more about Rosario and her new best friend in Mark of the Dragon, the first book in the Urban Dragon series. Check our show notes for links. Music is provided by Mads. Learn more about 600 Second Saga, our authors, how to submit your flash fiction, and how to support the podcast in the show notes. This has been Mariah Avix and 600 Second Saga.